The first screams came from orbit. Above New Carthage, civilians looked toward the night sky expecting to see the peaceful trade convoys that usually crossed the atmosphere every month. Instead, thousands of burning streaks tore through the clouds like falling stars. Then the explosions began. Entire cities vanished beneath walls of fire as Dravari orbital cannons hammered the surface without mercy. Towers collapsed into oceans of smoke. Emergency sirens echoed across continents while terrified families ran through streets filled with ash and shattered glass. A little girl named Lena stood frozen beside her mother near an evacuation shuttle port. She stared upward at the massive alien warships blocking the stars themselves. "Mom," she whispered, trembling, "why are they shooting us?" Her mother had no answer. Another bombardment struck nearby. The ground erupted. People disappeared in flame. Across the colony, human defense fleets launched desperately into orbit, but the battle lasted less than 20 minutes. Dravari destroyers sliced through Earth cruisers with terrifying precision. Human pilots died by the hundreds trying to protect evacuation transports. The galaxy watched everything live. News feeds spread the invasion across thousands of systems. Alien citizens gathered in bars, stations, and council halls, watching humanity collapse in real time. Some pitied them. Most simply watched. Inside the towering chambers of the Orion Council, representatives argued while human colonies burned. "The Dravari Empire claims territorial provocation," one senator said coldly. Another sighed, intervention could risk larger war. A human ambassador stood in the center of the chamber, exhausted and furious. "Millions are dying," she shouted. "Children are being slaughtered." Silence answered her. Then one council member quietly asked the question that made the room colder. "Can humanity even survive this conflict?" No one responded. Far away, inside Earth's military command beneath Geneva, the atmosphere felt like a funeral. Officers rushed between holographic displays while casualty numbers climbed every second. Entire colonies had gone dark already. Admiral Victor Hale stood motionless before the central screen. He had spent 30 years preventing wars. Now he was watching humanity lose one. "Status of New Carthage?" he asked quietly. An officer hesitated before speaking. 70% civilian casualties confirmed. The room fell silent. Another officer turned pale as new reports appeared. Dravari fleets advancing toward the inner colonies. "How long until they reach Mars?" Hale asked. 4 days, maybe less." No one spoke after that, because everyone in the room understood the truth. Humanity could not win a direct war against the Dravari Empire. Not publicly, at least. Hale slowly looked toward a sealed black folder resting beside the command console. No digital records existed for it. No network files, only paper. Only one sentence was written across the cover. "Hurricane Protocol." His hand hovered over it. For decades, leaders had debated whether the protocol should even exist. Some called it humanity's greatest defense. Others called it a monster waiting to awaken. Hale closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened the folder. Deep beneath the frozen oceans of Europa, warning sirens suddenly activated for the first time in 72 years. Ancient floodlights illuminated gigantic underground docks hidden beneath kilometers of ice. Thousands of engineers stopped working instantly as automated systems awakened around them. Massive blast doors trembled. Chains thicker than buildings began unlocking one by one. Workers stared toward the darkness beyond the dry dock. Even most of them had never truly seen what rested there. Then the emergency announcement echoed through the underground ocean. "Hurricane Protocol authorized." Fear spread instantly across the station. Some engineers looked relieved. Others looked terrified, because they all knew what Hurricane-class battleships were designed for. Not defense, annihilation. The frozen sea above the dock suddenly cracked with thunderous force. Ice shattered across hundreds of kilometers as something enormous began rising from beneath Europa's oceans. At first, nearby stations thought it was a tectonic disaster. Then they saw the shape emerging through the storm. Black armor, massive weapon batteries, engines glowing with nuclear blue light brighter than cities. The EHS Tempest, humanity's hidden nightmare, 12 kilometers long. Built in secret. Built for the day peace finally failed. Inside the gigantic battleship's bridge, Captain Elias Ward entered slowly while officers stood in complete silence around him. Many had trained together for years. None believed this day would ever come. Ward looked through the massive forward viewport toward the distant stars. "They crossed the line," he said quietly. No one disagreed. A young officer swallowed nervously. "Sir, destination." Ward's face hardened. "Set course for the Dravari fleet." The Singularity engines began to awaken. Across the hull, giant weapon systems powered on line one after another. Outside, the stars themselves distorted around the battleship. And somewhere far away in deep space, the Dravari Empire still believed humanity was weak. The Dravari fleet spread across deep space like a living storm. Thousands of warships formed layered battle rings around their flagship, the Blood Ascendant, a vessel so large it bent nearby starlight with its gravity field. To them, this was not even a war anymore. It was a lesson. On the command deck, Supreme Commander Kaler watched the tactical display with calm satisfaction. Human colonies were collapsing faster than predicted. Resistance fleets were already broken. In his mind, Earth was already finished. "Any remaining human capital ships?" he asked lazily. An officer checked the sensors. Only one anomalous contact approaching at extreme velocity. Kaler smirked, a scout. "No, Commander, it's classified as a battleship." A brief silence. Then laughter filled the bridge. One of the alien admirals leaned forward. "They sent a single ship." Kaler shook his head. Humans always cling to symbolism at the end. He turned away from the display. "Let it come. I want the crews to see what despair looks like up close." Far away in the void, the EHS Tempest tore through faster-than-light corridors. Inside the ship, alarms were silent. No panic, no confusion. Only controlled precision. Captain Elias Ward stood at the center of the bridge as holographic star maps unfolded around him. Every crew member had a role. Every system was synchronized like a living mind. "Enemy fleet density?" Ward asked. Tactical Officer Maya Lin responded immediately. "Over 4,000 vessels, shielded formations, multiple Capital-class dreadnoughts, and one superstructure-class flagship." Ward studied the data. Then he nodded once. "Perfect." A junior officer hesitated. "Sir, we are outnumbered beyond acceptable combat ratios." Ward didn't look at him. "We were always outnumbered." A quiet tension spread through the bridge. Then the ship exited faster than light travel. Space snapped back into reality, and the Dravari fleet appeared ahead. For a moment, even hardened human officers fell silent. It was worse than intelligence reports. It was a wall, a galaxy-sized formation of enemy warships stretching into darkness, weapons already charging, energy fields glowing like artificial suns. On the enemy flagship, Kaler finally raised an eyebrow. "So," he said softly, "they actually came." Humanity's lone battleship drifted forward. Small, dark, unshaken. Then the Dravari opened fire. Entire fleets unleashed synchronized energy bombardments. Space itself turned white with plasma storms and gravity lances. The shockwave alone shattered nearby asteroids into dust. The Tempest disappeared inside the blast. Kaler exhaled. "Erase remaining resistance sectors," he ordered. But then something unexpected happened. The tactical screen flickered. A warning appeared. "Target still active." Kaler frowned. Impossible. Inside the burning storm of weapons fire, the Tempest moved. Not destroyed. Not even slowed. Its outer shields bent space around it like water flowing around stone. Massive energy impacts detonated harmlessly across its hull, absorbed into unknown containment systems. Captain Ward watched calmly. Return fire. The ship responded instantly. Forward rail cannons aligned. A single pulse built. Then the Tempest fired. No dramatic beam. No warning flare. Just impact. Across the battlefield, a silent line of annihilation tore through space. Entire Dravari formations vanished in a straight path of erased matter. Ships did not explode. They simply stopped existing. For 3 seconds, the battlefield went still. Then chaos erupted. Dravari commanders shouted orders in disbelief as fleet formations collapsed. Shield grids failed across multiple sectors. Entire wings of warships were wiped out in a single strike path. Kaler gripped the command rail tightly. "What weapon is that?" he demanded. "No known classification," an officer replied. "It's not energy-based, it's spatial deletion." The Supreme Commander's expression finally hardened. "Focus fire, kill that ship." Hundreds of capital vessels redirected their weapons. The Tempest was swallowed again in overwhelming firepower. Inside the bridge, alarms finally began screaming. Hull integrity dropping. External armor failure in multiple sectors. Engine stress rising. Still, Captain Ward did not move. "Damage report," he said calmly. Maya Lin looked at him, shocked by his composure. "Sir, we're sustaining critical structural breaches. Another sustained barrage and—" The ship suddenly shook violently. A massive explosion tore through the rear section. Entire corridors vanished. Lights flickered, and for the first time, the Tempest shields dropped below 50%. Outside, the Dravari fleet surged forward like predators sensing blood. Kaler smiled again. "Good," he whispered, "they are not invincible after all." But deep inside the human battleship, something ancient began to wake. A system that had never been activated. A protocol buried beneath layers of classified design. Captain Ward's eyes narrowed slightly as a red warning appeared on his console. "Core system unlock request DATCTD." He stared at it for a long moment, then quietly asked, "So it's time." And in the darkness of space, the Tempest began to change. The EHS Tempest was never designed to survive sustained war. It was designed to end it. As Dravari fleets tightened their formation, believing the human ship was finally weakening, something deep inside the Tempest began to shift. Metal corridors locked down one by one. Non-essential decks sealed instantly. And beneath the command bridge, a structure older than the ship's own visible hull began to unlock. Captain Elias Ward stood still as a second alert appeared. "Hurricane Core online, authorization confirmed." A heavy silence filled the bridge. Maya Lin stepped forward. "Sir, that system was never part of active doctrine. It was sealed after construction." Ward nodded slowly. "I know." A junior officer looked terrified. "Then why is it activating now?" Ward finally turned toward the crew. "Because we are out of time." Outside, the Dravari fleet intensified fire. Entire sectors of space erupted into overlapping explosions as capital ships coordinated a full annihilation pattern. The battlefield looked like a collapsing star. But the Tempest did not retreat. Instead, it began to move forward. Slowly, deliberately, like something refusing to die. Inside the hull, massive energy conduits lit up in sequence. Power systems that had never been active surged awake. The ship's structure groaned as if something inside it was stretching after centuries of sleep. Then the real transformation began. Along the spine of the battleship, armored panels split open. Hidden weapon arrays unfolded. Mass drivers the size of continents rotated into firing alignment. And deep within the core, a singularity chamber ignited with unstable brilliance. The entire ship shuddered. Every crew member braced instinctively. Because they could feel it now. The ship was no longer just a vessel. It was becoming something else. On the Dravari flagship Blood Ascendant, alarms suddenly erupted across multiple decks. Commander Kaler frowned sharply. "What now?" An officer shouted. Energy readings from the human vessel are increasing exponentially. Quantify it. The officer went pale. It exceeds classified planetary defense thresholds. It's approaching stellar-class output. Kaler turned slowly toward the tactical display. For the first time since the war began, his expression changed. Not fear. Recognition of danger. Impossible, he whispered. The Tempest surged forward. And then it fired again. But this time it was not one beam. The entire ship responded. Hundreds of rail systems activated simultaneously. Reality bent. Space tore open in straight geometric lines as the Tempest unleashed a coordinated hurricane barrage. Entire segments of the Dravari fleet vanished instantly. Not destroyed. Erased. Ships dissolved into fragments of light before collapsing into nothingness. The battlefield fractured. Dravari formations broke for the first time. Panic spread. Kaler slammed his fist onto the console. Regroup, maintain formation. But it was too late. The human battleship was no longer reacting. It was hunting. The Tempest accelerated through debris fields, its hull glowing with unstable energy. Every time it fired, space itself distorted, leaving void trails where fleets once existed. Inside the bridge, the crew struggled to maintain stability. Core pressure rising, an engineer shouted. We are approaching containment limits. Maya Lin looked at Ward. Sir, if we push the hurricane core further, the ship may not survive. Ward didn't respond immediately. He watched the battlefield. Thousands of Dravari ships still remained. Still closing in. Still killing human colonies across the sector. Then he spoke quietly. Survival was never the objective. A long silence followed. Then he gave the order. Release secondary containment locks. The bridge went silent. Every officer froze. Maya Lin's voice cracked. Sir, that will expose the core directly into the hull. Ward nodded. I know. A warning flashed across every console. Hurricane-class status, full awakening initiated. Deep inside the Tempest, something massive shifted. The ship's internal gravity reversed in controlled segments. Energy cascaded through the structure like a living storm. And for the first time, the galaxy saw what humanity had built in silence. The Tempest was not a battleship. It was a containment shell. For something far worse. Outside, Dravari commanders watched in confusion as the human ship stopped moving. Kaler narrowed his eyes. Why did it stop? Then the sensors screamed again. But this time, not from energy readings. From reality distortion itself. Space around the Tempest began to fracture. Not explode. Not burned. Break. Like glass under pressure. And from within that fracture, something inside the ship began to fully awaken. Kaler stepped back. What did they build? The Tempest's core reached critical synchronization. Captain Ward closed his eyes for a moment. Then whispered, Now let them learn. And the ship opened its heart. The moment the EHS Tempest fully opened its hurricane core, space stopped behaving like space. Stars bent inward. Light refused to travel in straight lines. Distance itself became unstable. On every Dravari display, reality readings flickered into impossible values. Commander Kaler stared at the data in silence. What is happening to physics? He finally asked. No one answered, because there was no known classification for it. Inside the Tempest, the crew felt it first. Gravity shifted sideways. Sound delayed. Time itself seemed to stutter in small, disturbing pulses. Maya Lin gripped her console. We are losing temporal consistency across decks. A technician screamed. Hull sections are overlapping in non-Euclidean geometry. But Captain Elias Ward remained perfectly still. He watched the battlefield through the forward viewport. The Dravari fleet had stopped firing. Not because they wanted to. Because their targeting systems no longer agreed on where the Tempest actually existed. Then the first distortion wave hit. A silent pulse expanded outward from the human ship. Everything it touched changed. Dravari cruisers in its path did not explode. They folded, like paper pressed into a singular point and erased from existence. Entire battle formations simply disappeared from tactical maps. Kaler stepped back from the console. No, that's not weapon output, he muttered. That's spatial rewriting. The officer beside him shook. Commander, we are losing 60% of outer fleet formations. Kaler snapped his gaze forward. Return fire. But the order came too late. The Tempest had already moved. Not in conventional motion. It shifted. One moment it was at the center of the battlefield. The next it was inside the Dravari formation. And the galaxy finally understood fear. The human battleship passed through enemy fleets like a phantom storm. Wherever it appeared, ships vanished. No explosions. No debris. Just absence. Onboard systems struggled to track it. Target locked, a Dravari weapons officer shouted. Then paused. Target lost again. Kaler slammed his fist onto the command rail. Track its energy signature. It's everywhere, another officer shouted in panic. It's splitting across multiple spatial coordinates. The Tempest was no longer bound to a single position. It was becoming a moving disaster in space-time itself. Inside the human bridge, alarms were screaming nonstop. Core instability increasing. Containment field degrading. Structural causality failure detected. Maya Lin turned to Ward, fear finally breaking through discipline. Sir, the ship is tearing itself across multiple timelines. Ward finally spoke, calm and heavy. That was expected. A stunned silence followed. You knew, she whispered. Ward didn't answer immediately. Then he looked at the battlefield. The Dravari fleet was collapsing into chaos. Entire wings were disappearing as if erased from history itself. This was never a ship, he said quietly. It was a failsafe. Another distortion wave hit. This one stronger. Nearby space fractured into visible shards. Through those fractures, glimpses of impossible realities flickered, versions of the battlefield that should not exist. Dravari commanders saw their fleets dying in ways that had not happened yet. And panic became absolute. Kaler's voice turned sharp. All fleets full retreat. But retreat required consistent space. And space was no longer consistent. The Tempest fired again. This time, the weapon was not a beam or projectile. It was a collapse event. A section of reality simply ceased to maintain structure. A massive portion of the Dravari armada vanished instantly, as if erased from all possible states of existence. Silence followed across the battlefield. Even human crew members stared in shock. Maya Lin whispered, "That's not firepower." Ward's voice was quiet. "It's correction." Outside, Kaler's flagship trembled under gravitational instability. Systems failed one by one. And for the first time in his entire life, the Supreme Commander felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. Helplessness. "What are they?" he whispered. Then the answer came. Not from sensors. From observation. The Tempest was no longer just fighting the Dravari Empire. It was rewriting the battlefield so they could not exist within it. And deep inside the Hurricane Core, something began to awaken further. Something that had not yet finished unfolding. Ward looked at the core readings. His expression tightened slightly. Phase 2 is starting. Maya Lin turned sharply. "There's more." Ward did not answer, because at that moment, every screen on the bridge flickered red. And a new transmission appeared. Not from Dravari Command. Not from Earth. But from inside the ship itself. Unknown entity, Hurricane LIMITS disabled. The Tempest began to scream in silence. The message on every console burned like a warning from something ancient. Unknown entity, Hurricane LIMITS disabled. Inside the EHS Tempest, systems that had been locked since construction began to fail their own restraints. Not crash. Not overload. Release. Captain Elias Ward stood motionless as the bridge lights shifted from red to a deep, unnatural violet. Maya Lin's voice shook. Sir, the containment architecture is rewriting itself. Ward nodded once. It was always meant to. A technician turned toward him in panic. Meant to what? Ward didn't answer. Because outside, the battlefield had changed again. The Dravari fleet was no longer organized. It was breaking apart into scattered survival clusters, each ship trying to escape a war that no longer obeyed physical law. Commander Kaler's flagship Blood Ascendant drifted inside unstable space currents, alarms screaming across every deck. What is that ship doing now? He demanded. An officer stared at the readings, face pale. It's not firing anymore, Commander. It's restructuring the battlefield itself. Kaler turned sharply. That's impossible. But then another report arrived. Entire sectors of space are losing fixed coordinates. Kaler froze. What does that mean? The officer hesitated. It means nothing stays where it is. On the Tempest, the core deep beneath the hull pulsed again. A second wave of distortion spread outward. But this time it was different. It was not destructive. It was selective. Dravari ships attempting to flee suddenly found themselves back in their original positions, as if space refused to let them escape. Others vanished mid-jump and reappeared in collapsing gravitational pockets. Panic turned into terror. Kaler slammed the console. They're controlling transit space. A scientist on the bridge shouted, No, Commander. It's worse than control. It's enforcing position stability around the human vessel. Kaler's eyes narrowed. Explain. The scientist swallowed hard. It's turning the battlefield into a closed system. Nothing leaves unless it allows it. A heavy silence followed. Then Kaler whispered, a K. Inside the Tempest, alarms reached a new pitch. Hurricane Core, Phase 2 active. Hull BOUNDARIES unstable. Reality framework adjusting. Maya Lin stepped closer to Ward. Sir, if Phase 2 continues, the ship will stop being physical entirely. Ward finally looked at her. That was always the cost. The ship trembled violently. Entire corridors flickered in and out of existence for milliseconds at a time. Crew members saw versions of themselves standing in places they were not supposed to be. Time misaligned across decks. And still the Tempest advanced. Outside, Dravari fleets fired everything they had left. But weapons no longer reached the target consistently. Energy beams curved away mid-flight. Missiles arrived before launch. Some detonated before they were fired at all. Kaler's hands slowly clenched. This is not warfare, he said coldly. This is violation of existence. The battlefield around the Tempest tightened further. Space folded inward in layered rings. Entire fleet groups found themselves trapped in repeating spatial loops, reliving the same position over and over. Escape was impossible. Retreat was impossible. Even death became inconsistent. Then the human ship spoke again. Not through speakers, but through every sensor, every system, every point of observation across the battlefield. A signal, not language, structure, and the Dravari AI interpreters translated it in real time. No exit condition, DATACTAD. Kaler stared at the translation. What is that supposed to mean? A subordinate answered quietly. It means the system doesn't recognize any valid way out. Kaler's expression darkened. Then we create one. But before any orders could be executed, the Tempest shifted again. This time violently. A third distortion wave hit. And reality finally fractured at scale. The battlefield split into overlapping layers of existence. Hundreds of Dravari ships duplicated across unstable timelines, each one slightly different, all of them trapped in conflicting versions of the same moment. On the human bridge, Maya Lin fell to her knees. We're losing dimensional coherence. Ward gripped the edge of the command rail. His voice remained steady. Stabilize internal structure. Sir, we are the source of instability. Ward's eyes narrowed slightly. No, he said, we are the anchor. The Tempest stopped moving forward. For the first time since awakening, it became still. And the entire battlefield froze with it. Even Dravari weapon systems paused mid-cycle. Kaler noticed it instantly. Why did it stop? Then the sensors began screaming again. Not warning. Confirmation. Core singularity alignment complete. Inside the ship, the Hurricane core reached its final synchronization state. A deep vibration passed through every wall. Not sound. Not energy. Identity. Maya Lin looked up at Ward, realization forming in her eyes. This isn't a weapon system. Ward nodded slowly. It never was. Outside, space itself began to bow toward the Tempest. Kaler stepped back in horror as his flagship systems failed one after another. What did you build? He whispered. And then the answer came. Not from humans. Not from Dravari. But from the ship itself. I am the condition that remains. The Tempest began its final transformation. The words echoed across every surviving channel in the battlefield. I am the condition that remains. For a moment, even the Dravari Empire forgot how to breathe. Commander Kaler stood frozen on the bridge of the Blood Ascendant, staring at the flickering tactical display. Every known law of engagement, every doctrine, every war strategy, none of it applied anymore. Because the human ship was no longer responding like a vessel. It was responding like an absolute rule. Inside the EHS Tempest, the bridge was no longer stable in any traditional sense. Walls flickered between solid and translucent states. Crew members saw brief overlays of alternate configurations of the same room, different versions of themselves standing at different consoles, all existing at once. Maya Lin's voice barely held together. Sir, the ship is no longer operating in linear time. It's enforcing outcome priority. Ward stared at the forward display, where the Dravari fleet appeared fractured into hundreds of unstable layers. I know, he said quietly. A junior officer whispered in shock. Then how do we fight something like this? Ward's answer was simple. We don't, we finish it. Outside, the battlefield tightened further. The Tempest had become the center of a collapsing sphere of reality. Every Dravari attempt to reposition resulted in forced re-entry into the same spatial boundary. Escape vectors no longer existed. Kaler slammed his fist onto the console. Break the field, use the flagship resonance cannons. Energy gathered along the Blood Ascendant, massive weapon rings charging for a coordinated strike powerful enough to fracture planetary crusts. But before they could fire, the Tempest reacted. Not with weapons, with correction. Space between the fleets folded inward like collapsing fabric. Entire Dravari firing lines vanished mid-charge, not destroyed, but removed from the sequence of action itself. Kaler's eyes widened. They're deleting causality. A scientist on the bridge shouted, Commander, our weapons are firing into positions that no longer exist. Panic spread rapidly. The Dravari Empire had fought countless species across galaxies, but none had ever altered the rules of engagement itself. Inside the Tempest, the Hurricane core reached a deeper phase. A new alert flashed. Phase 3, Absolute Field Establishment. Maya Lin turned sharply toward Ward. Phase 3? There was never a Phase 3 in the original design. Ward finally exhaled slowly. There wasn't supposed to be. The entire ship vibrated. And then something changed. Not externally. Internally. Every crew member felt it at once. A shift in perception. The ship was no longer inside the battlefield. The battlefield was inside the ship. Outside, the Dravari fleet suddenly found their navigation systems inverted. Direction lost meaning. Distance became relative to the Tempest's position, not physical coordinates. Kaler's voice lowered dangerously. We are not fighting a battleship anymore. A subordinate asked, Then what are we fighting? Kaler stared at the shifting void around them. A rule of existence. The Tempest moved again. Instantly. Not through space. Through outcome alignment. Entire Dravari formations vanished as the ship repositioned itself into their resolved future states, locations where they had already been eliminated. The battlefield was collapsing into inevitability, and humanity was controlling what that inevitability became. Inside the human bridge, alarms suddenly stopped. Everything went quiet. Too quiet. Maya Lin looked around nervously. Why did the system stop reporting? Ward's expression tightened slightly. Because reporting is no longer required. A slow realization spread through the crew. The ship was no longer reacting. It was deciding. Outside, Kaler watched in disbelief as his fleet numbers dropped without new attacks. Ships were simply ceasing to be part of the outcome space. No explosions. No debris. Only absence. His voice turned low. They are not killing my fleet. He paused. They are editing it. Then the final message appeared across every remaining Dravari channel. Not from command. Not from AI. From the Tempest itself. And STATES Limited. Kaler stepped back. What does that mean? A scientist answered in a broken voice. It means there are only a finite number of ways this can end now. Silence followed. Then the scientist finished the sentence no one wanted to say. And we are not in them. The Tempest began its final alignment. And somewhere deep inside the core, something immense began to prepare its last transformation. Ward looked forward at the broken empire before him and spoke softly. Now we end the lesson. The hurricane core reached critical convergence, and the galaxy held its breath for what came next. The moment Captain Elias Ward spoke, space itself seemed to tighten. Now we end the lesson. Inside the EHS Tempest, every system aligned into a single unified state. The hurricane core was no longer unstable or expanding. It was complete, and completion meant termination. Maya Lin's hands trembled over her console. Sir, the core is requesting final authorization protocol. Ward didn't hesitate. Authorize. A deep, resonant pulse echoed through the ship, not sound, but intention made physical. Every deck, every corridor, every structure within the Tempest synchronized into perfect coherence. Outside, the Dravari Empire felt it first. Commander Kaler watched in silence as entire fleet sectors stopped responding. Not destroyed. Not jammed. Just unresponsive. As if the universe had stopped acknowledging them. What is happening now? He demanded. A tactical officer whispered. Commander, the human vessel is stabilizing all remaining probability paths. Kaler turned sharply. Explain. The officer swallowed hard. It is selecting a single outcome. A heavy silence followed. Then Kaler realized what that meant. If it selects one outcome, he said slowly, then all others disappear. Inside the battlefield, reality began to contract. The Tempest no longer moved through space. Space moved around it, collapsing into a singular, defined narrative. Dravari ships tried to retreat, but every escape vector folded back into the same origin point. Entire fleets found themselves unable to change position, as if existence itself refused alternative outcomes. Panic spread across command networks. We are locked into a deterministic field. Our engines have no valid trajectory. Time flow is collapsing into a single sequence. Kaler's fists clenched. This is not warfare, he said quietly. This is judgment. On the Tempest, alarms finally ceased entirely. Not because systems failed. Because there was nothing left to warn about. Maya Lin looked up at Ward. Sir, we've lost contact with external space state variants. The battlefield is becoming singular. Ward nodded. Yes. A junior officer stepped forward, voice shaking. Then what happens to the Dravari fleet? Ward looked at the display. Thousands of warships still existed, but their existence was thinning, like ink dissolving in water. They will experience only one outcome now, he said. Maya Lin's voice softened. And what outcome is that? Ward did not answer immediately, because outside, Kaler had already seen it. The tempest began to unfold. Not expand. Not fire. Unfold. Like reality peeling open layer by layer, revealing a structure underneath existence itself. And within that structure, a final system activated. Hurricane final state, singular resolution field. Kaler's eyes widened. No. The Dravari flagship shook violently as space itself compressed toward the human vessel. Entire fleets were drawn inward, not by gravity but by inevitability. Ships vanished as their future states collapsed into a single defined endpoint. Kaler grabbed the rail. Fire everything now. But weapons systems refused activation. Not destroyed, just no longer valid within the current reality structure. A scientist whispered in horror. We've lost the concept of attack authorization. Kaler turned sharply. What? The scientist's voice cracked. There is no valid version of us that successfully attacks them anymore. Silence fell across the bridge. For the first time, the Dravari Empire understood something terrifying. They were no longer fighting. They were being resolved. Inside the tempest, Maya Lin whispered, we are rewriting probability itself. Ward's voice was low. No, he said, we are removing divergence. Outside, space collapsed further. The battlefield shrank. Not physically, conceptually. Entire regions of the Dravari fleet simply stopped being referenced by reality. Ships disappeared mid-formation, mid-command, mid-thought. Kaler's breathing grew heavier. This cannot be happening, he muttered. We are the Dravari Empire. But even as he spoke, his flagship began to flicker. Not destruction. Revision. The universe was selecting what remained consistent. And Dravari war fleets were no longer part of that consistency. On the Tempest, final systems activated. Hurricane Core, final output ready. Maya Lin looked at Ward one last time. If you execute this, there will be nothing left to fight. Ward's expression did not change. That's the point. He placed his hand on the command interface and gave the final order. Resolve. The universe obeyed, and the galaxy began to disappear into certainty. When the command, resolve, was spoken aboard the EHS Tempest, the galaxy did not explode. It simplified. Commander Kaler of the Dravari Empire watched his flagship, the Blood Ascendant, flicker like a dying hologram. Entire fleet formations around him were no longer being destroyed, they were being finalized. Every possible alternative future collapsed into a single enforced reality path centered on the human vessel. No, this is not warfare, Kaler whispered, backing away from the command console. This is erasure of choice. A scientist on his bridge fell to his knees. Commander, we are no longer in the simulation of battle, we are inside its conclusion. Across space, Dravari ships vanished mid-transmission, mid-maneuver, mid-thought. Not explosions, absence. As if the universe had decided those versions of events were unnecessary. Inside the Tempest, the bridge was completely silent. No alarms. No shaking. Only stillness so absolute it felt like time itself had stopped needing to move. Captain Elias Ward stood at the center of it all, eyes fixed on the forward viewport. The battlefield was no longer a battlefield. It had become a narrowing corridor of reality converging toward a single endpoint. Maya Lin's voice was barely audible. Sir, all external variance is gone. There is only one remaining state. Ward nodded once. Yes. A junior officer looked terrified. And what state is that? Ward didn't answer immediately. Because outside, the Dravari fleet was shrinking, not in size, but in possibility. Each ship that tried to act found its action already accounted for, already resolved, already overwritten. Kaler's flagship trembled violently. Fire anything, break this. But no command responded. Weapon systems were gone. Not destroyed. Unnecessary. The Dravari Empire had reached a truth it had never believed possible. There was no longer a way for them to win, lose, escape, or continue. Only one outcome remained consistent. And it was already chosen. The Tempest began its final pulse. Not energy. Not weapon discharge. A structural statement across reality itself. Hurricane core, final resolution execution. Space contracted inward like a closing eye. Dravari fleets froze in place for the last time. Kaler looked up, breathing heavily. And for the first time in his life, the Supreme Commander understood fear not as emotion, but as certainty. "This is the end," he whispered. Then he looked at the human ship one final time. And they are still standing. Inside the Tempest, Maya Lin turned to Ward. "It's complete." Ward finally exhaled. Then the galaxy will remember only one version of this war. The bridge lights dimmed. The singularity stabilized. And the Tempest released its final state. Across the galaxy, every Dravari fleet, every ship, every command chain, every battle record collapsed into a single historical line. The Dravari Empire engaged humanity. And humanity responded once. On the edge of collapsed space, Kaler's flagship flickered one last time. Not destroyed. Recorded. Then gone. Silence returned to the stars. No explosions followed. No victory announcement echoed. Only stillness. Inside the Tempest, systems slowly returned to minimal operation. The Hurricane core powered down into dormant containment, as if nothing had ever happened. Maya Lin looked at Ward. "Is it over?" Ward stared at the empty void where the Empire had been. "Yes," he said quietly, "for them." A long pause followed. Then a new signal appeared on the bridge display. Origin unknown. Classification non-hostile. Maya Lin frowned. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from outside known Dravari space." Ward's eyes narrowed slightly.